Okay, welcome to the California Estuary Monitoring Workgroup. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because we have an action-packed agenda. So, can everybody see my slides? Okay. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. And here are our goals for the meeting today. So hopefully you all had a chance to look at the agenda. We're going to, we have some administrative housekeeping to do to start off, and I send around the charter, select our co-chairs, set our meeting schedule, things like that. Our main two substantive items over the 2 hours we want to cover is talk about the development of the OPC Wetland Action Plan, and Shri is here from OPC, and she'll be leading that discussion. And then many of you I know who are on the phone were at the Estuary work group that we had a couple of weeks ago up at Tiburon. And so we had some action items and some follow-up items that came from that. And so Jan will be leading us through a conversation of kind of what those were and where we go from there. But also part of that meeting goal number C has to do with our priorities as a work group, sort of, taking into account what happened at the workshop at Tiburon, but just also some of the conversations that we had at our March meeting the last time we met. And there were some ideas that people threw out there. And so in preparation for this discussion item C, I sent out a poll, a very short two question poll, to help us think about what are some of the priorities that we as a work group might want to take on. And so I think Jan was going to drop that link in the chat if she hasn't already, because I can only see part of my screen here. And so if you have not, that's going to be our last agenda item. So if you have not done that poll, you still have time. It's really just who you are, and it's 2 questions. And so take a minute over the course of the first part of this meeting and quickly fill out that poll. I have it open on my other screen, so I can, when we get to there, we can take a look and see what the poll results are and use that to guide our discussion. Sound good? All right, yeah. All right, so moving along, here's our agenda. I'll give you a quick recap. Again, here's my blinking yellow arrow to remind you to do the results, and then we'll wrap up and talk about next steps. And so for those of you who were not at our March meeting, which was the first meeting, the March meeting was kind of the reinitiation of the California Estuary Monitoring Work Group. So thank you all for coming back. We're thrilled to have almost 40 folks on the phone, which is great. And so a lot of what we did at that first meeting is we kind of went through like what was the history of the California Estuary Monitoring Work Group, what it had accomplished in its earlier incarnation, and what did we hope to accomplish now under our current format. We had some discussion of the existing estuary monitoring program. If you missed that meeting, the slides are available, the meeting notes are available, so you can take a look at that. Let me know, let Nick know. Nick's on the phone, and we can make sure that if you're having problems finding that, you can get that. But it was just kind of an overview to orient everybody on what is going on in the state with estuary monitoring. Excuse me, sorry about that. And then we discussed a draft charter. So we had a straw person charter that was sent out. We had some good conversation, and there was a red line version that was produced, and we'll talk about that in a moment. And then we spent the bulk of that meeting talking about potential things that this work group could prioritize in terms of our work moving forward. We culled that down to a short list, which is what was in the poll that is in the link that Jan just sent. And so we'll continue that discussion today. So that's what we covered in our March meeting for those of you who missed it. All right, so just as just put this slide in as a recap, kind of in the bigger picture, just to remind folks of kind of the overall high level objective of this group. California we have a variety of different estuary monitoring efforts that are going on in the state. Some are statewide, like the Estuary Marine Protected Area Program under OPC and CDFW. Some are region specific, like the WRMP and the IEP in San Francisco Bay, and the Bight Regional Monitoring Program, the Wetland Recovery Project in Southern California. Some are associated with national programs like the NERS and the NEPs, and some are associated with these regional mitigation programs. So we have a variety of different monitoring programs in the state. We have parts of the state, as you can see from the map, that are underrepresented that we would like to address those gaps. Kevin's on the phone. They're active in the Central Coast and are really building off of what the EMPA program as kind of the core of what they're doing in the Central Coast. We definitely have some gaps we're trying to fill in the North Coast. But the overarching objective of this work group is really to improve coordination among all of these efforts in the state, to allow us to work better together, to have technology transfer, idea exchange, work on how we can better share data, share information, share tools and resources, so that we can leverage off of each other. We can answer these larger statewide questions about condition and management needs and guide management actions, and just work more effectively as a state instead of as a collection of individual programs. And so that's really the high level mission of this group, is to try to collectively work towards that vision of a more coordinated statewide program, which is very consistent with the overall goals of the Water Quality Monitoring Council, which is where we sit under the council. And so very consistent with their goals of improving coordination across programs. And then related to that, making hopefully all the great information, data, and knowledge that we compile through this readily available and easily discoverable by the public and each other. And so that's kind of what we're all aiming for. Just a small little task that we all have to accomplish together. So that's our lot in life. All right, so as in March, what came out of our conversation in March and the subsequent iterations on the notes were that we had lots of things that we wanted to do. And if you look back at the meeting notes, we had some long-term priorities and some shorter-term priorities. And so in terms of the more near-term priority work items, what I'm showing you on the screen here are what came out of that conversation as kind of the floated to the top, in a sense, in terms of the things that we might want to work on. So we talked about creating kind of a map or a website or some sort of online place where we could keep better track of what's going on where and who's doing it. So just that very fundamental kind of high level knowledge. We talked about the fact that we kind of call different things by the same thing by different names in different places oftentimes, or we say a word like estuary and it might mean one thing to one person and something different to somebody else. And so I'm kind of developing some consistent classification and terminology and some crosswalk between some of the different program terms that we use, so that almost like a dictionary type of thing. We talked about that. We talked about expanding or enhancing some of the existing data portal. We've done a lot of work under the EMPA program. SFEI has done a lot of work under their program with EcoAtlas. And so we've talked about enhancing and improving some of our data sharing and data portal systems. We also talked about the desire to have a statewide network of Sentinel sites, or sites that we could begin to track or continue to track over time in a more consistent manner to understand status and trends and provide context for a lot of the other projects we do. So how do we define those? How do we identify those? What data do we collect at those? That type of thing. So we talked about that. And then the last major thing we talked about was the need to really more explicitly connect all the monitoring data to the questions that the different programs and agencies are trying to address. And so how do you crosswalk between the questions and the different indicators and monitoring approaches that we use? So if you have a question about, sort of effectiveness of a certain management action, how do you sort of crosswalk those questions to the different protocols and data, and creating that kind of matrix or crosswalk? So those were some of the things that we talked about. Obviously, there's a lot to do there, and everybody on this phone has a full-time day job in addition to doing the work of the work group. And so the purpose of the poll was to try to identify maybe the top 2 out of these, and also to see who might be interested in working on those, so we could begin to work on some of these things in a more systematic way based on our priorities. So at the end of the meeting today, we'll come back to that and see what the poll looks like. All right. So the first major, so anyway, before I move on, let me pause there, because that was all by means of recap before I get into the first agenda item. Are there any questions from those? You can raise your hand or put it in the chat, or anybody who was at the last meeting want to elaborate or add to or correct anything that I said that was wrong. This is a great thing about having a meeting right after lunch, right? Because everybody's still kind of in that post-lunch lull. But any questions?
You did a great job summarizing it, Eric. That was
Kevin.
thorough, yet brief.
Okay, well, thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. Feel free to continue to use the chat if you have questions. All right, so our first major item that we wanted to cover today is hopefully finalizing the charter, right, which is kind of our guiding document for how we're going to conduct ourselves as a work group. And then I'll ask at the end of this, Nick, I'll ask you to say if there's any process things that we need to think about as we finalize this through the council. But what I have on the screen is the mission. I just cut and paste this right out of the charter. This is basically what we agreed to last time, and there were no comments on it. So I just wanted to provide that as a starting point. I won't read it to you because you guys can all read, but this was the mission, and I sort of paraphrased it at the beginning of the meeting. So here are the objectives. Again, these are, see if I can do this. I have the charter open. So let me just see if I can escape out of this.
And Eric, you got just one comment on the mission, which
Yes.
was Nick's, or potentially Nick or someone suggested changing. Okay, there's just a lot of Nicks on the call right now. Changing tribal organizations with either nations or governments. So I'll just make note of that.
Okay, thank you. And we can do that here. This is the actual red line. So
you're going to need to make it a lot bigger.
Okay, thank you, Jan. Okay, so you're just saying tribal organizations, which are somewhere in here that will.
Yeah, I'll just maybe change out organizations with any to replace it with nations or government.
Okay, tribal, this one, right? This is what you mean right here, right? Okay, tribal, like that, Nick?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. So I'll put up the PowerPoint again because I think it's easier to read, but what I just wanted to point out, the main area where we had comments on the charter last time was on the scope of objectives. The rest of the charter, which was really about like how we conduct ourselves and how we schedule meetings and who can participate and the chairs, there weren't really any comments on that, right? Everybody was sort of kind of the sort of working the work of how we conduct our business. All the comments were on the scope and objectives. So you can see that there was a fair amount of comments on that. And so we can look at those. What I put in the PowerPoint slide was just the cleaned up version of that. So I'll flip back. That might be a little easier to look at there. And so this is just the clean version with all the red line accepted. I'm just leaving it in this view in case I need to edit it. So I sent this out with the agenda, and so I wanted to know if there's any further comments or edits to these objectives, or if people are happy with them and we can try to finalize this. So okay, so I see a couple of things in the, okay, so there's a number in the chat. There's a number of questions about Indigenous peoples. So we're still, Cindy, did you have suggested language, or I know you said you would defer to them, but. I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you, Cindy. You're breaking up a little bit. Yeah, no, we may have to use the chat, so maybe you're on a cell phone or. Okay, so what I would say on that was, again, I want to make sure we get the language right there. So maybe you can use the chat or by separate email if you have suggested language or suggested people you think we should talk to get the right language on that. We can make sure we get that correct. But any specific questions or additional changes to the objectives? Again, I'm not going to read them to you, and I did send them out ahead of time.
Hey, Eric.
Yes.
Just one quick thought on the objectives. I think this all looks, great and makes a lot of sense. I don't see any mention of climate, and I'm just thinking, particularly given that our estuaries are along the coast, and that we've got a lot of work to do coastwide with regards to climate adaptation and the role that estuaries play in climate adaptation. Maybe we don't just talk about restoration and management, but talk about climate adaptation. Thread that in there somewhere.
Like in here, like in the second one.
Yeah, I think restoration management, climate adaptation actions. Yeah, I think that maybe that's a good place for it.
Okay. I'm just going to take a note of that rather than trying to do it on the fly.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so we can add that to the second bullet. Thanks, Christina. Any other questions or comments or suggestions on the objectives? No. Okay, so with the changes, so what I'd like to do is try to bring some closure to this. So we have two, in addition to the red line that was sent out, we need to make a change to on the tribal folks, indigenous peoples. We'll figure out what the best language for that is. And then the addition that Christina just suggested. With those changes, are folks happy with the charter? Is there any dissenting? I don't think we need an official vote, but is there, let me know by raise of hand or in the chat if you have any issues with the charter. Otherwise, we'll clean it up and consider it final. I don't think we have, okay, no issues, good. All right, so we'll finalize that. And Nick, what's the process after we finalize that? It just becomes our living document and it can go up on the website. Is that it? Or?
Yeah, that's right. That's pretty much it's your governing document and to help guide you, and then you can change as needed.
Okay, perfect.
Yeah.
Super. All right. Okay. Well, thank you for that. All right, so our next order of business before we get to the OPC Wetland Action Plan is, we talked last time, I've been facilitating these meetings, but our desire was to have a more formalized co-chair. We talked about that the different work groups of the council do it in different ways. Between the last meeting and today, we've had some offline conversations. Several of you on the call know that you've been approached by myself and either encouraged, cajoled, or otherwise attempted to be shamed into serving in this role. But we do have two people who've been gracious enough to volunteer to serve as our inaugural co-chairs. So that's Jan Walker from SCORP, who I think most of you on the phone know, and Pike Spector from OPC, Ocean Protection Council. So they'll serve as our co-chairs, and I'm going to turn the meeting over to them in a moment. And so I think the way we have it set up is that they will be our co-chair, and then we'll have the chance to re-elect co-chairs or choose new co-chairs once a year, right? And so that's the way we're set up. So it's not a lifetime sentence. So other people will step up and serve in that role over time. And we can, I think we have the flexibility if we wanted to add a third co-chair, we can, but I think some of the work groups have 3 co-chairs, but for now, I think we're good with 2. All right, so that after we do the dates, I'll turn it over to you, Jan.
Eric, should we ask if anyone is
yes,
here to be a third co-chair?
that's very good. See, Jan, you can take it away from here.
I feel like that would be great if you would like to do that, but not necessary.
Right. Yes.
2 thoughts, Eric, Jan, and Pike. One, I was thinking a third one could be a federal or a tribal co-chair. I think either one would be great. So if there's someone on the call representing a federal or tribal group that would like to step up and be a co-chair, I think that'd be really cool. Just because I'm co-chair on the other one, the CWMW, and it is really nice having 3 people chairing these things to help bear the load.
And I guess a summary of what that load would be is, right, we would just have a meeting prior, probably a few meetings prior to our quarterly meetings. And then we're just trying to move forward with the action items that we have set forth on as a group. If you're not comfortable stepping up now, you can always email Pike or I, and we can talk offline too.
Yeah. And Rachel, to your comment, yes, that's a great suggestion about staggering the two co-chairs. I mean, I think what we can do is maybe we can, because we're sort of just starting out and so it's brand new, I think as we come up to the end of the first term, we may think about either maybe both Mike and Jan want to continue, or maybe one of them wants to roll off that role and have somebody else and create that staggered. So I think that's a good role, and so I think that's a great idea, and we can probably kind of transition into that as we're getting through the first year of the work group.
Yeah, I think that's a great plan. And I want to echo what Jan said as well, that if there's anyone who maybe feels a little intimidated to speak up now in that tribal or federal space, or maybe someone isn't here currently who could represent either of those groups, that would be great. I'll drop my email in the chat. I'm happy to talk about it.
Perfect. Okay, so I can continue to drive. Do you want to take over, Jan, on the meeting discussion, or?
Eric, I just want you to have your moment of fame. Okay. I feel like these people, they want to hear from you.
Okay.
So you just keep on going.
All right. Well, I don't get enough attention in my life, so I'll keep going.
That's what I heard. That's what I heard.
Okay, so we're in the interest of trying to avoid kind of the dual nightmare that we all live in these days. We picked 4 potential meeting dates, and again, probably the December might be the most difficult because it's the closest, but the idea is just to have these be at sort of a recurring regular interval. So we picked the second Wednesday of the month for quarterly, and so we haven't picked times yet because we haven't determined yet whether these are going to be 2-hour meetings or full-day meetings. But I think what we're proposing is to just calendar these 4 dates, because again, with 40 people, it's impossible to probably to do a poll and accommodate everybody. So the idea is we would just, unless there's strenuous objections, like we've hit a holiday, which I don't think we have because they're midweek, but if we hit some really problematic date there, our proposal would be to have those 4 dates, and then the next question we'll want to ask is, do we want to do them all virtual or some combination of virtual and in person? And again, if mornings or afternoons are better. And if we have that basic information, then I think we can set a calendar for the year and get that on people's calendars early, so that it's you can have that set ahead of time. So let me start by asking if there's any strenuous objections to those 4 dates as our meetings for the year. And I think this was also in the agenda, so these shouldn't be the first time you've seen the dates.
Eric, this is Christina. December 13th is one of the potential dates for the CWMW December meeting.
Yeah.
But that hasn't been set yet.
Okay, so if we set ours first, then they can work around us.
Yeah.
Okay, since we have Kevin on the phone. So.
Fine with me, Eric. We're waiting on Melissa to hear something else.
Thanks. I think, speaking of Melissa from EPA, I think Dana from EPA is going to be our EPA representative on this group. All right, so we have the dates. So Christina had suggested that it would be great to get everyone together once a year in person, which I completely agree with. How do folks feel like, and I know it's difficult for some people, not everybody, so we would probably offer, I think we would definitely offer a hybrid option. for those who cannot travel. But how do folks feel about having one meeting a year we can physically, for those who are able, have an in-person meeting? I know those of us who are at the workshop a couple years ago, it was really great to see everybody in person and have the conversation and see each other. Anybody opposed to one in-person meeting a year?
I think that's great.
Okay. Does anybody have a preference for, not December, obviously, but for the other three? Anybody want to throw out a candidate that they think which time of year is less problematic? I mean, I would propose March would be mine, just because next one virtual, then we'll have an in-person. And I know once we get into June and September with summer and school and things like that, that can be a little more challenging. I know March might hit some people spring break, but maybe it's early enough in March. So how's March sound as a in-person?
That's good.
I like it.
Okay, great.
We'll go on a wildflower hike.
Perfect. So we don't need to figure out where just yet. We'll just put that down as a March. So what we'll probably do is have the March be in person and have it be a longer meeting, since people are going to travel for it, or like an all, depending on the venue. And then the others will have as 2 or 3 hour meetings, because they'll be virtual. And Kirsten, could we include something fun like professional sharing of cool monitoring, going on a different necessarily speed talks? I love all of those ideas. I love all of those ideas.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the workshop that we had 2 weeks ago, which was super well attended. And I think if we set up a similar activities like we did at that workshop, it could be really, it could add and be really informative. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, Rachel, making it more of a workshop.
Yeah.
And fun. Or we could all go into the field together too.
And it'd be both
Yeah.
speed talks and then speed walks.
Yeah, I love it. For the other three, and we'll just as a general, do people have a strong preference for morning or afternoon? I mean, I know some of you are in different time zones potentially, but this one we did afternoon. Does anybody have a strong preference one way or the other? You prefer mornings or afternoons, or is it far enough ahead of time it doesn't really matter? Sounds like
Yeah, I think it's far enough ahead of time. It's hard to say. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So our action will be the March will be in person with a longer meeting. We will work. I'll have the co-chairs and we can work with you, Nick, to kind of calendar dates and send out invitations and get that on people's calendar. So, okay. All right. Well, that's great. So we have our at least our meeting dates and our in-person dates selected for the next year. So awesome. So that'll, I think, hopefully make planning easier because we get those on the books. And then we can also, once we get this all settled, we can update that on the website as well. All right, super. So at this point, I'm going to turn it over to you, Shri, to lead us through our next agenda item.
Thank you, Eric.
Mhm.
You want to run the slides, right?
Working?
And I can turn mine on here so you can hear people. Yeah,
That's good, Shri.
that's good. Okay. I'm working out of Eric's office, so
Very nice to be the same.
yeah, that's why you're doing that. Okay, great. Thank you for the time today. And I really appreciate the CEMW's input on the California Wetland Action Plan. And I know I've talked to several of you in different calls over the past few months while trying to get this thing to a good shape. And for today, I wanted to go over some of the proposed processes and outline and get some additional feedback from this team as well. So next slide, please. Thank you. So for the statewide wetland action plan that OPC is proposing, the vision is that it's a roadmap to achieve the coastal wetland goals as outlined in OPC strategic plan. There are acreage goals in there for wetlands, as well as restoration and climate-related goals. So throughout this process, this is intended to be a collaborative effort to build on regional plans without reinventing the wheel and just filling gaps as identified through the scoping process. So those priorities and gaps are primarily going to be identified as part of the process for building out the wetland action plan. And as all of you might be aware, there is this really intersects with multiple climate goals for the whole state, including 30 by 30 and natural and working land efforts that the state has invested in. And a final thing that I wanted to say around the vision and the purpose is that the Coastal Wetland Action Plan is intended to complement existing programs, regulatory or otherwise, and not override any of the requirements that currently exist. Next slide, please. So the proposed scoping process is as follows, spans a period of several months from now until like Q4 of next year, starting with identifying those key partners that we want to work with, including agencies, non-governmental organizations, tribal organizations, as well as equity NGOs that we want to work with on refining the outline that I'll be sharing with you all today. The public outreach and coordination aspects of the action plan work will continue from now through June of next year. And the idea is that we would bring an outline to the OPC council meeting, which is in December, for approval by the council. And once approved, the thought is to initiate working on the expanded action plan while soliciting input from key partners and stakeholders, and also incorporate any of the council feedback on either content or timelines or engagement or any of those aspects that I spoke about earlier. And the goal or the wish is to have a finalized version of the wetland action plan. I originally had Q3 in there, but then realized that the reality of it is that it's going to be closer to Q4 of 2024. And we are hoping to coordinate with CEMW throughout the process. So thanks for the space and the time at this work group meeting to initiate, to kick off that process with this team. So here is a proposed outline. We're still in a very early stage of coming together with this outline. So once I have some feedback from today's meeting, I'm hoping to send this outline to you, to the members of this team, so you can provide additional feedback or comments on the document as appropriate. So the first section will be around identifying this collaboratively informed process to develop the action plan around key partners, who's the key audience, and what are the desired outcomes. A lot of this I've already talked about earlier. The second portion will be talking about terminology, something that Eric alluded to earlier around, how do we define coastal wetlands? And, we want to make sure that these are aligned with other existing efforts, including CARI definitions that we already have in place. Defining terminologies around, what do we define as restoration, enhancement, preservation? These are things that we grapple with constantly. So we want to make sure that we have these terminologies defined ahead of time, and define classification and typologies used to guide actions. That's part two. The third is around, what are the goals that OPC has for the action plan, and how best do we crosswalk this with other agency plans, right? So we also note that while California has statewide wetland restoration, conservation, protection goals, there are several efforts that are ongoing. This action plan will be limited to coastal wetlands as defined by the terminology in Section 2. And a lot of the foundational data and information that are used to guide this will be generated from the CARI base map effort that we just created a base map of coastal habitats, and the sea level rise vulnerability assessment that we have that is being performed for coastal habitats. In terms of implementation strategy and priority actions, that's something that needs to be fleshed out a little bit further. What are the priority actions by OPC? Where are the partners already filling a lot of these gaps? And then where does OPC need to fill in the remaining gaps? So that's that section. And in terms of implementation strategies, what kind of funding mechanisms are in place? What can be instituted further? What are some of the strategic partnerships that we can really rely on to capitalize on existing programs and projects that we have? What is the technical support that's going to be needed to implement some of these strategies that have been outlined? And also things like, ongoing wetland losses, how do we overcome that? So that's going to be part of the implementation strategy section. There's also going to be a large effort on outreach and coordination. So there is public awareness and synergize with existing tribal-based solutions efforts and also equity NGO efforts that OPC has in place, and it's ongoing. So that's a priority there. In terms of data sharing, management, and information structure, that's going to be a big part of the action plan as well. So this is to ensure that there is public access to data and information, and we hope to do this by leveraging existing data tools and management system. And the last part, which is also probably the most important and really challenging, is to track progress and do so in a timely and cohesive, quantitative manner, right? So currently we have, there are efforts right now, including the EMPA monitoring work, the CARI base map acreage changes that we are engaged in, but identifying additional tools to track progress, including existing and future satellite imagery and tools and other programs like 30 by 30. How do we leverage all of these to track the progress across the state? So that was a lot, but that's the broad outline that we kind of fleshed out. It needs to be fleshed out further based on input from multiple stakeholders across the state, some of whom you are here in this room today, and some that we need to reach out in the near future to get that feedback. Next slide, please. So you might be wondering, so what's the general approach? How are we planning to go about this? So for the general scoping process approach, the general process for arriving at sections of the Wetland Action Plan is to develop a prioritization process, which is probably the most heavy and critical piece of the plan, right? What kind of approaches are we going to use? Are we going to use a combination of approaches based on where the opportunities are, where the needs are, or a little bit of both? So that needs to be determined in the near future. And once that's determined, we figure out where are the anticipated, meeting of goals that are associated with other agency plan, which in turn helps us identify where OPC efforts will be most beneficial. So we definitely want to complement existing efforts and work with them to just enhance the effectiveness of the action plan and achieving acreage goals that we have set. And then once all of these processes are figured out, then the next step is to develop an implementation strategy, which would then be a step-by-step process to achieve the prioritization that we've set in place. And where this group can really be impactful in this process is to help us inform how to adapt existing monitoring efforts to assess the effectiveness of the strategy. Because the monitoring is going to be key in helping us with tracking the progress and helping us with overall effectiveness assessment as well. Next slide, please. So yeah, this brings us to some key questions for today for this group, and we're hoping that we can engage this group in answering some of the key questions. I'll go over all 5 of them, but feel free to chime in on one or more or all of them if that's something that you want to chime in on today. We'd really appreciate your input, and I'm going to be taking some notes while you chat. So if I look away, that's because I'm on my taking notes. So does this all sound feasible? That's question number 1. Does the scoping process sound feasible? The timeline is ambitious, but so are the goals that we're trying to accomplish. So we'll figure that out as we go along. The second question is, who are the key partners that need to weigh in on early stages? By that, I mean from now through December, for example, and then maybe later stages when we're doing the expanded work plan. That's the next step. What are the critical gaps to fill? If you have anything in mind, considering existing plans and programs, which geographies do we want to focus on? What are the resource types that we want to consider? That's the third question. And the fourth one is something that we really would like your input on, is if someone can provide some examples of meaningful engagement with tribes and EJ communities that's really worked well for your programs. So we want to adopt as much of that as possible and make sure that this is meaningful, and meaningful and timely, and able to bridge that capacity gap that exists with both of these communities. Sorry, excuse me. And then the last one is kind of an open-ended question, but something that you see as a critical barrier to consider in the development of the plan.
And I feel committed to share because you don't know.
Yeah, I'm gonna give everybody maybe a minute or so, and then mute myself so you can come off mute. Yeah.
Okay, so hopefully you guys can hear me again. So these are the questions that Sri put up, and give you a second to contemplate those.
But first, Sri, you actually have a question.
And then looking for input on any or all of those. Again, these are to help guide the process moving forward. There's some sort of high level questions, I guess. We can start with the first one, right? Anybody look at this and go, nah, not gonna happen. Everybody, or does it sound like a reasonable process? And also, again, are there any missing pieces in terms of people, knowledge gaps, things that we haven't thought about? So let's see. So I see Cindy has, because I know she was in the field. Will there be formal processes for public and stakeholder input to affect the content of the plan? Will there be peer review of recommended actions and priorities? Yeah, right.
Yeah, so just come here and
She's gonna
answer it. Can everybody hear me?
She's coming into my screen.
Okay. Yeah, that's the intended path for this, that there is intended to be a formal process to gather EJ community feedback and tribal engagement. I'm working with other OPC colleagues to ensure that this is in alignment with the OPC equity plan implementation, as well as working with our tribal liaison to make sure that we have that process set in place ahead of time. I don't have an answer on what that timeline is going to look like just yet, because a lot of things are still up in the air, but definitely that's the intent. There is intended to be a formal process. One of the other spaces where we hope to get public input is as part of the council meeting itself, right? So we intend to have this material go out as part of the council meeting agenda, so public can weigh in on it and provide public comments at the meeting itself. So those are things that we have in mind for now.
Okay, so we have a couple of comments in the chat, but let me go first to Jeff and then Christina, who had their hand raised. So I'll start with you, Jeff.
Yeah, thanks. Just a quick
Hey, Jeff, you're on mute.
Oh shoot! Am I?
Still can't hear you.
No, Eric, you can't hear us.
We can hear you, Jeff.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Sorry about that. All right. So a quick.
Still nothing, Jeff. Still can't
Hold
hear
on.
you.
I'll tell Eric that he just can't hear us.
Jeff, we can hear you. Yes.
Jeff, you're good.
All right.
I'll go to you, Christina. Maybe Jeff, you can put it in the chat,
No.
because I still can't hear you for some reason.
No, Eric, you
You
can't
need to turn our
hear
volume up.
us.
Sorry, I just saw the message.
Oh, they can hear. They can't. I can't
You
hear.
can't.
Okay. See, technical difficulties. Did everybody hear Sri's response though before?
Yeah. But Eric, can you hear us now?
Now I
Yes.
can, yeah.
Yeah, we were all just talking into a void, so you were just leading the meeting over top of us.
All right, sorry about
But
that.
okay, go ahead, Jeff.
Go ahead, Jeff.
We were saying great things about you, Eric. You missed. Yeah, no, sorry, quick clarifying question for Sri on the prioritization on the previous slide. I think I missed what exactly is being prioritized in that process.
So yeah, what is being prioritized is how do we want to go about, so basically the action plan is a roadmap, right, to achieve the acreage goals. So the acreage goals are 10,000 acres of wetlands created, preserved, or restored. And that's an ambitious goal. So how are we going to prioritize our activities, funding, restoration opportunities, creation opportunities to meet those goals? So it's still an ongoing discussion. So that's what we anticipate in the prioritization section. And the idea is that, again, this is going to be collaboratively informed as well, right? So we want to hear stakeholder input on how best to prioritize to meet the goals.
Okay, thanks. That helps. So it's sort of writ large. I got it. All right, thank you.
Okay, so let's go Christina, and then we can go to the chat, the questions that were in the chat. So go ahead, Christina.
Sure. Hi, Sri.
Hi.
We are all drowning in plans, right? Strategic plans, action plans, lots of plans. Plans are great because they're just plans, right? It's easier to write plans than to like do other things. So I'm just wondering, like, given that we're all collectively drowning in plans, like, has there been an effort by OPC to like reflect on previous deliverables that have been developed in this vein and whether or not they were effective, and what parts were more effective and what parts were less effective? And like like with regards to these critical gaps, I feel like it's so tough because OPC, y'all are kind of in a weird place, right? Like you're not a regulatory agency, but like you have this big like stewardship, like framework, but like it's an entirely different state agency that like owns a lot of the coastal wetlands. So it's like, is that going to be part of this gap filling, like figuring out like where like OPC, like specifically like what niche it can fill and what it can be good at and what it can keep going through like churn of staff and stuff like that? Like, I just don't want to see you guys pour so much effort into something that just, like sits on a shelf.
Yeah, this is such a great question and something that I grapple with all the time too. We have a lot of plans, and originally when we conceptualized another action plan, like the wetland action plan, we were really hoping that we could just stitch together whatever is existing, pull all those together. That then helps us inform our strategy as to how we can fund these better. So this is not intended to replace what we're already doing, right? For restoration, for creation of new wetlands or whatever else. That's still part of our mandate. But when we kind of did a landscape research, we still felt that there could be some gaps that OPC can fill, and hopefully this is a way of filling that more effectively. But we the other path that we had considered was simply just doing almost like a lit survey on what else is what is everything that's out there in the state. For example, the WRP regional strategy has a significant, like a comprehensive plan for the entire bite, and we definitely don't want to reinvent that. We would just want to simply take that and use that to guide our strategy for the next few years. So we're not planning on tweaking or replacing or reinventing that part. But for areas that may not have as well fleshed out of a strategy, I think the evaluation that we would like to do is that, is there an opportunity where we can fill in some of those gaps and do that in a quick, meaningful way? Quick and meaningful not really go hand in hand, but in a meaningful way. That's kind of what we're hoping to accomplish. But Christina, we're definitely happy to chat either now or offline to see if there are other ideas that we can work on together. This is not intended to be like a burden, additional burden that a work group has to now take on and work on this, then over 6 months just to sit on the shelf. We're really hoping to start like implementing those strategies like in the next year, as soon as this plan, while this plan is in motion. That's the idea.
No, that sounds great. Well, I'm always, an open book. So I'll, happy to do whatever to help you guys. But I'm really glad that you're focusing on like, I think the same way that like for our estuary MPA monitoring approach, the blueprint we developed was very geographically like, this is, differentiated. That I suspect that taking that kind of geographically differentiated approach and like focusing on, like you said, for the bite, boom, wetland wetland recovery program, boom, that, Central Coast, like what are the opportunities and constraints there? North Coast, what are the opportunities and constraints there? I think that's going to be a really productive way for you guys to proceed. Just so you're not duplicating effort and really like maximizing the return on your investment of time.
Yeah, absolutely. I really, if there's anything I really hate, it's like being redundant and not being efficient. And I really like the approach of where identifying those gaps is going to be key in prioritizing our next steps.
Okay, so David had his comment in chat. Land development to meet the state housing element is imposing stress and concern on the San Diego County coastal wetlands at this time, causing incidental take per ESA section 10 to be ignored by local city councils. What is the CMW response, right? So David, you can elaborate. I'll sort of paraphrase, and if you want to elaborate, right? So this is being, and sure you live in San Diego, so you probably are acutely aware of this tension between other programs in the state to meet housing and affordable and other housing needs, and how sometimes environmental protections or environmental programs are short-circuited in the name of those. So I don't know if there's, David, did you have any elaboration, or I'll let you or anybody else respond to that?
David, are you with what organization are you with? Because I'll just offer from the perspective of a regulator. So I work for the San Francisco Bay Regional Water Quality Control Board. So the San Diego Regional Water Quality Control Board, Region 9, that would be, there's a number of agencies that have regulatory, statutory authority over these issues. We're not that group. We are we're a working group of estuary professionals. And I would offer that we're not in a position to have a response to your question because we are not a regulatory decision-making body.
Don't know if David's still on or not. So, okay. So the next question / comment is from Karina. So I'll read it, Karina, and then you can go and elaborate. Scoping sounds feasible. I think it'll be important to cross-reference to existing plans, which we've kind of already talked about, that are in alignment and standardized as much as possible. So I think, Karina, my sense is that Shri already addressed that in her last response, but if you have anything else on that, you can. I'm not sure if she's still on. Karina, does that you feel like that's been addressed in the previous response? Maybe Karina had to drop off.
Maybe that was an earlier question.
Jeff, did you have another question?
Yeah, sorry about that. Another clarifying question. So you had mentioned the a vulnerability assessment being done for coastal wetlands. Is that right?
Yes.
Yeah, and so that's not out yet. Is that correct?
No, that's not out yet. The plan is to have that done once we have an updated base map, which we expect at the end of September. So I think by the December timeframe, we hope to have the sea level rise vulnerability assessment completed, at least the first round of it.
And is that going to go out for review and comment and things like that?
I think so, yes.
Well, the reason I mentioned this is, all of these efforts that I've been involved in, from regional to, the Southern California effort to the Wetlands Recovery Project down to the sites where I work, these vulnerability assessments become quite important, and actions start hinging on these vulnerability assessments. And so it becomes really critical to understand what's going into the models and what's coming out of the models. Like, for example, the OPC state level guidance that came out maybe last year or something like that, mentioned a little bit about like wetlands. I think it was pretty good for sort of built infrastructure, but it also recognized the need to think more about wetland systems, which are complex. That's right. It's not just water levels that's going up. The wetlands are trying to keep up as well. So just a general comment that the degree to which this is going to hinge, this further action in this wetland action plan is going to hinge on the vulnerability assessment. And I'm sure it will to some degree, just to think about how to incorporate that and to use that information.
Yeah, definitely. And, it also really depends on how mature the assessment is as well. So the idea is for us to have that out for public comment prior to the December council meeting. So there will be an opportunity to review it at the time. And I think as part of the outline development process, one of the tasks for us is also to determine to what degree we want the prioritization to be informed by the vulnerability assessment. And that's what you're getting at, right?
Yes, and of course they always provide some information, but it's just what you can glean out of that. And some of these vulnerability assessments that I've seen don't necessarily take into account wetland processes, either sort of uphill migration, or the transgression, or sort of local processes that will increase the height. And there's still a useful model, right? If you just understand water level, but you need to interpret it differently. That was one of my concerns about the state level, for the state agencies to level rise action plan. It used pretty aggressive targets, and it was basically, and it didn't really account for wetland processes very much. So basically, it looked like using living shoreline nature-based solution approaches weren't going to really be that feasible, because it's just they had the water coming up so quick and not taking into account wetland processes, which is probably fine for the built environment, right? Because the built environment is not going to raise its own elevation. But if you're trying to think about these wetland processes, it's just really important to incorporate those, or know how to interpret the vulnerability assessment. So I beat that to death, but we've been down this road a few times.
Yeah, your point is well taken, because the vulnerability assessment is for the all of the coastal habitats and not just wetlands. So definitely something to keep in mind, upland migration, and that's something that needs to be interpreted carefully as well. So
Very good, thanks.
Thank you.
So just catching up on the chat. So Cindy, I won't read Cindy's entire chat, but in essence, what Cindy was saying in her chat is that OPC was really, again, pointing out to Christina's comment that OPC is not a regulatory agency, and is really kind of bringing together people and providing, sort of coalescing people and providing resources to get these projects done in a cooperative manner. So I think Cindy was just kind of reinforcing some of what Christina said. And so then Bobby put in the chat the actual goal, which was, and the first part of the goal, I'll point out, it says work with partners, right? Which is exactly what Shree's talking about, to ensure an additional 10,000 acres of coastal wetlands will be protected, restored, or created by 2025, and increase the acreage of coastal wetlands in California is defined by the coastal wetlands inventory by 20% by 2030 and 50% by 2040. So if you want, and then there's a link if you wanted to get specific goals that the action plan is intended to help achieve.
Yep. And I think there was one more comment before Cindy's.
I was just saying that's really.
Was something else around media communities. I didn't read the whole thing.
Oh yeah, thank you. This is stepping in for Dana today. Badwa from EPA. My 2 cents on tribal and EJ communities is that they always want a listening ear. I highly encourage reoccurring outreach via informative webinars and distribution of non-technical reading materials to be shared and meaningfully discussed. following up and establishing trust with tribes and EJ communities is also key. Yes.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then Sydney's saying OPC is
Yeah.
entirely dependent on the regulatory agencies to achieve the goals of the strategic plan.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. This is not intended to be a standalone plan.
Yeah. Great comments, and we'll capture all the chat. Were there any, on the last bullet point, were there any kind of critical barriers that folks felt they were really important to sort of put on the table for consideration and kind of working through the details of the plan? That we've identified some in terms of engagement and outreach, and some of the potential kind of potential conflicts with other policies that may be in place, state or locally. So identifying those, but there are other barriers that folks think are important, just to make sure that we kind of get them on the list of things that we need to explicitly try to address in the plan. So the key one, besides outreach and engagement, which is always difficult, but there's the conflicts with other policies.
Also, if you want to reach out to me about any of these elements of the plan, or want to be involved in the early participation for putting together the outline, please do so. You have I think my email's on the slide deck too at the end. So feel free to reach out to me as well. I think we got a lot of good comments.
Okay, anything else on this plan? You guys we'll have, and we'll send out in the meeting notes, Shree's email, and then feel free to contact her if you have other comments or questions, or want to jump in and help out in any way.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Okay. I think that'll bring to a close that agenda item. Thanks for all the great feedback. This will be an ongoing point of discussion. And then Christina has a comment about how open OPC staff has been in getting feedback. Yes, I echo that, Christina. It's great to have the dialogue, and good that we have the work group here as a forum for that dialogue. All right. So Jan, I think I'll turn it over to you now.
Great. Yeah. Well, thanks. So the next part of our agenda is a recap from the California Estuary Monitoring Workshop that we had on August 29th. So about 2 weeks ago. Here's our attempt at a group photo. Even despite all my rallying cries, I couldn't get everyone to look at the camera, but we really tried. So we had a great workshop. It was called Reflections, Insights, and Future Directions. And so I just kind of wanted to give a high level summary and where we're hoping to go next. So our main vision from this workshop was to have a comprehensive, integrated estuarine and coastal habitat monitoring and assessment program that provides readily accessible and interpretable data and information that informs management decisions. So we set out to have a workshop that was based around this idea of how should we form an integrated estuarine monitoring program that is statewide. So we challenged everyone to think about questions such as, what are the elements of such a program? How can we best achieve this vision of a program? What tools and approaches do we have and do we need? And what are the key challenges that we must overcome? So we kind of had a morning panel where we talked about, where we had people representing already existing programs, where they talked about some of the challenges that their programs face. Then we had lightning talks by the agencies, which I'll give a brief overview on. They talked about what are the priorities of the agencies. And then we had some scientists give some examples of how monitoring data can actually be used in terms of management actions. And then we ended the day in a breakout activity where we tried to actually answer some complex questions. So Eric, if you could go to the next slide. So one of the key takeaways, I think, was we had 4 agencies give lightning talks where I provided them a series of questions. But one of the questions that they all answered, which I thought was fantastic, was they provided us with kind of a wish. So I asked them if they could ask for one thing to advance their program, what would it be? And from our notes, I just wanted to share this with you all because I thought this was interesting. So the State Coastal Conservancy, the one thing they wanted was regulatory coordination. The San Francisco Estuary Partnership was speaking on the WRMP, so the Wetland Regional Monitoring Program, and they wanted a stable source of long-term funding, which I think we all want for our monitoring programs. The Ocean Protection Council, they wished for an increased capacity for near real-time data publishing access and a one-stop shop monitoring program, which I think we all had that goal going into the workshop. And then specifically CDFW talked about the MPA program, and they wanted data visualization and expanded habitat mapping. And so what I wanted to highlight here is all of these wishes we have listed on our list for prioritizing for things that the CMW could work on. So I do think that this work group can have a lot of influence when it comes to helping these agencies reach some of their wishes. So then we broke out into breakout groups where we asked, okay, we want to make a case for a coordinated estuary monitoring enterprise. So what are the most effective and persuasive arguments? So we sent out the workshop people because we didn't want to do all this work. So we made them do all the work. And we had a great discussion. And so I'm going to highlight some of those next. So if you could go to the next slide, Eric. So from those breakout groups, this is a high level synthesis. So we had some desired influences. So we said a coordinated estuary monitoring enterprise would emphasize benefits of the coast and the need to be nimble in our management and ability to respond to emerging threats. A coordinated estuary monitoring would improve literacy of the public so they could influence policymakers and funders, and then also would influence the natural resource management entities at the local and state level to use the tools derived from the monitoring data, right? So we actually want to produce tools. We want to influence the public on why monitoring is important. And then we also want to influence management. Next slide. So then we also talked about, okay, if we had a monitoring program, what would it actually produce? And we had a number of different things that we wanted to produce in our hypothetical monitoring enterprise that we're all going to create here today, right, as we work towards this. So we would like to produce improved decision-making through more effective monitoring. We would like to have improved coordination and leveraging. So we talked a lot about building trust. So a monitoring program, we need the regulators to have trust that the monitoring program is going to help them answer their questions and actually regulate the permittees. We want to have a collaborative network to inform decisions. So this touches on what Shri also was talking about. So we want to be able to inform 30 by 30 actions in regional conservation planning. We want improved accessibility, interpretability of data. So we talked a lot about data, and we talked a lot about how the data can be more accessible and more user-friendly so that we can more broadly reach a bigger community. And then lastly, we talked about creating an expertise database and catalog of past projects. So we're all on here as some wetland scientists and experts. We all have a ton of failed endeavors. And so we also not only want to create some database of our achievements of things that have been successful, but also lessons learned. And I thought this was a really cool suggestion. So those are our long-term outcomes. And so here's where we're hoping to go on the near term from the workshop. So we do want to produce something from the workshop. Julie did an amazing job at coordinating this workshop. She is a recent graduate from UC Davis. And so in the near term, we are right now assimilating all of the notes and videos, and we're going to disseminate them to all the workshop participants as well as CEMW. So you'll see those coming into your inbox. We are going to use this work group here today as a vehicle for actually achieving some of these outcomes. And so that at the next conversation we'll have is talk about some of the priority actions that we want to try to accomplish over the next year. And like I said, we want to develop priority work items for CEMW to achieve. So we have a lofty goal of using the workshop to write some type of white paper or manuscript, and I would love some feedback from you all. You know, a lot of great ideas came out of the workshop, and I would like us to see them being put down on paper. Some ideas I thought that could come out of a lot of the work that we did was recommendations for establishing and implementing long-term monitoring. We talked a lot about programs that are already existing. We also talked about creating a schematic linking monitoring back to agency needs and programs. So really making sure that the monitoring that we're setting out to do and establish is actually going to help our agencies and our management actions. So we're not monitoring to monitor, right? We're monitoring in a way that is actually going to be actionable. And then lastly, I also had some ideas that we could identify key technical and programmatic knowledge gaps. So one, Julie and I are hoping to work on this. Two, I would love your feedback if you think there's anything that else we're missing that we could put down on the workshop. And third, we'd love some co-authors. So if you're hungry for writing about monitoring and getting some of these broader, large-scale ideas down, let us know. But I would love any comments that you have. Yeah, Kevin.
I will help you.
Kevin, that's awesome. I'm writing that down in the official notes.
Kevin will help you.
And any comments on like some substance, or you think that might be missing in the literature right now that we could use this group to help synthesize some of those ideas?
I was asked today by somebody else if there was going to be a white paper, so I can now let them know. I forget now who was asking me, but I'm sure I'll remember it at some point and get back to them.
Okay, well, I think that the silence means that everyone's so excited. They're just stunned into silence. They're so excited for this paper. So that is where we're headed. So thanks everyone for a great workshop. I hope that we can kind of have a similar format when we do our in-person CEMW meetings moving forward. It was great.
It was a great workshop.
It was so fun.
We have to make sure that wherever we meet has a really good view, because that place has a really good view.
We did. We met at Tiburon. So yeah, it's a little different than the Squirp office park.
Yeah.
I want to second that. Thanks to everyone for coming out to the Estuary and Ocean Science Center, which is threatened by closure from San Francisco State. I want to add that they want to make EOS a self financially sustaining facility. I want to add, Jan, I think one thing that we should make explicit in that white paper is, you know, given like Cindy's really helpful comment about how dependent OPC is on regulatory agencies to achieve its wetland conservation and stewardship goals, that we make sure that that white paper includes a section on how coordinated estuarine monitoring can streamline project permitting and can take some of the burden, off of project applicants, by taking care of, gradually over time, taking care of the monitoring responsibilities that's required of permittees. So I think that's certainly one of the ways that we've developed and sold the WRMP. And I think that's certainly something that can be used to help sell the coordinated statewide estuarine monitoring enterprise.
Thanks, Christina. Okay, I was just writing down some of those things. Okay, so our next agenda item. Eric, did you want to do this or do you want me to keep going?
I'm going to switch back to see if people put stuff on the poll.
Okay. So I'll just go over. So we asked you all to vote.
Oh, we did, yes.
Poll. And so we're going to talk about some of these priority items that, as you saw, are the items that we talked about in our last March meeting, but had really great overlap with what our agencies are also interested in. And so cool. Can you zoom in, you think, on 4 and 5? Is that, do you know how to make your screen bigger?
I'm gonna try.
Oh yeah, perfect. Oh, you gotta love a good pie chart.
Mhm. It's almost perfect pie, except for purple.
What we didn't tell people is when we asked about these work groups, these are binding. So if you filled in the pie chart, I'm just kidding. Okay, so cool. It looks like when we're rating our activities, our first one was to create a map or website of different monitoring programs. Do you want to explain more of what we were thinking about that, Eric, from the March meeting?
Yes. So yeah, so I'm just hovering over so you can see the sort of breakdown. So that was sort of half the people put that as our first choice. So that's great. So the idea here is, and again, it can be an existing, it could be done on Eco Atlas, or it could be, it doesn't have to be a new website, but the idea is it's almost like a clearinghouse, right? Because one of the questions that came up was, who is doing what where, right? And these could be, regional programs. People still voting.
Having live results come in. That's cool.
Yeah. But it could be, sometimes there's smaller, there's smaller sort of regional or a small group of wetlands, like in, say, down here, like in Santa Monica Bay, there may be some, some monitoring. So the idea is, can we have a clearinghouse of some sort that says, or a map that says, here's where different things are happening, and it would just be basic information like, where is the monitoring happening? Maybe what are they monitoring? Maybe crosswalk to our EMPA framework. What are they monitoring? Who's the point of contact? Is it past monitoring or ongoing monitoring? Just some basic information. So the idea is, if you're working in an area and you're trying to establish partnerships or find out what data is available in your area or who's doing what, just as a way of creating more visibility of what's going on statewide. That helps us, right? Because if we're trying to coordinate among these programs, we can have a better understanding of what's going on. But it also helps all of us collectively in the geographies that we work in know who we should be partnering with or communicating with, or where there are opportunities for data sharing, things like that. So it's just, again, a very starting point for creating more visibility of the programs.
Yeah, and I do think that that's actually probably the easiest one of all of these maybe to do. So that's great.
And then I don't have to go through, but then just the top two, right? This one, which was, we talked about that this matrices are related questions and indicators. This has come up in a number of our conversations, right? Which is basically says, if I'm an agency or a program and I have a certain management question, it could be a regulatory compliance question, it could be a stress response question, it could be a vulnerability question, whatever your management questions. When we developed the EMPA framework, we worked with our management advisory committee, and they generated a long list of management questions that they often wrestle with. And so this is really, again, I think we saw it as a matrix of some sort that says, if your question is related to stress response on, wildlife issues, here are the different indicators that you might use to help answer that question. So it's just a way to help crosswalk some of the science and data collection with the specific management questions. And I think, again, we've done some of this already in the context. I know the WRMP, Christina, you guys have done some of this, right? The OPC, the EMPA program has done some of this, right? And so I think we can leverage off of those efforts, but it's just kind of consolidating a lot of that. So those seem like they're the top two.
Yeah, and I'll just add that the third one looks like it's developed consistent classification and terminology. And that's an interesting one because that's one of the key points in the wetland action plan that Shri just went over too. So there could be some nice overlap that what we come up with as part of the CEMW should also go into the wetland action plan. So really trying to establish consistent terminology throughout the state, especially as the WRMP continues to move forward with their regional monitoring and the EMPA moves forward with their monitoring and the WRP moves forward, right? That we all are using the same words.
And then in terms of, so not coincidentally, we had actually more even responses, but two of our most popular were the matrix and the classification. So it seems like even on that matrix, which was our number 2 priority up above, we actually have a fair number of people who are willing to or have already obligated themselves to help us work on that. So, but some pretty good. And I guess one thing I would say is even on the questions, I mean, we definitely had a clear 1 and 2, but as you can see, there's pretty broad support for all 5 of these. So I think the idea is we hope to get through all of these, but we at least have some ideas of where to start now.
Yeah, and so I think moving forward, Pike and I will probably look at, you know, the different work groups that people have maybe volunteered for, maybe just signed up, and we can resolicit some of that so that we can get started on these priorities. Is there anything anyone wants to add or has comments on in terms of our priority work items? Okay.
Okay. On our last slide, Jan.
Okay, yeah, so this is exciting because I think everyone loves getting time back in their days. So like I said, we're really excited to, now that the CEMW is up and running again. We had a great turnout today, almost 40 people. So remember, if you're interested in participating, you can contact Nick or subscribe through the Water Board website. If you're interested in working on any of the priority work items, you can talk to Pike or myself, as well as if you're interested in being a co-chair or if you're just interested in being more involved. We are looking ahead now towards our December meeting, which is December 13th. That's a Wednesday. We had started brainstorming some initial ideas. We're always looking to report out on efforts that are ongoing. So that will always be kind of at some of our meetings, like a catch-up time point where we can share new ideas, and then we'll always update on some of the work items that we're having as well. So we have some work that we're doing through the Wetland Recovery Project here in Southern California, where we're starting to identify reference and sentinel sites within Southern California. So we are hoping to have a report out on that. That's with the Coastal Conservancy and the Coastal Commission. And then there's been a lot of talk throughout the state on different ideas of resilience and what that means. And I know that SFEI has some efforts going on resilience. The WRP is working towards this idea of resilience. So we talked about maybe queuing up a discussion about CEMW tackling a unified approach to resilience. That's a really big ask, so we might revisit that, but just something that we can dangle the carrot on and have you thinking about. But if there's anything anyone wants to share to this forum, like as you saw, I know that OPC will be using this as a way to gauge interest in the Wetland Action Plan, but we really do see this as a forum to keep everyone up to date on programs that are going on in terms of estuary monitoring across the state, and as a way to bridge between all of these different efforts. So if you have other suggestions, you can drop them in the chat. Christina, that's a great question. So Christina's asking Nick, when is the CEMW webpage going to be updated to reflect its new form, charter, and activities? I don't have an answer to that.
All I can say is my interns did a lot of compiling of the old website and the old portal into the new format a couple months back, and that's the last I saw of it. So it got stuck in the shared Google Drive for the working group website update effort, but that's all I can say, Jan.
Okay, So it sounds like we should follow up on the website because we want to share the charter. And
Yeah.
that's probably where we would host our like clearinghouse or website of existing monitoring programs as well.
Yeah. And then another thing we could add to your future potential agenda items would be a discussion of North Coast Estuary monitoring engagement outreach effort with SFEI, with the EMPA funds.
Great.
Yeah, something like that.
I like that.
Nick, are you still on by any chance?
I don't think we have a lot of fake Nick.
Well, he's here, but it says
We have fake Nicks on the call today, so
Yeah, I'm referring to the website here. I'm going to put it in the chat. But that's a state board hosted
Right.
website, and that's all the old stuff. There's got to be. I'm assuming there's some discussion at the state board about sunsetting the old website and going to the new one. But
yeah. So they have a new template, Christina, and all these work group websites, and then the portals that went along with them, with under the portal drop down menu. Those got combined together, so there's no longer a website and a portal. There's just one web page, whatever you want to call it. I don't know. And that's what my interns worked on for the CWMW and the CEMW. So that's all been delivered to the State Water Board for their new look.
Yeah.
Okay, cool.
So my understanding is they had some staff time from the Department of Information Technology to take the content that the work groups developed and update the web page. And it sounds like we don't know what the timing on that actually has. So the content is sitting with the state board folks now, and we just need to wait for them to update the website.
Right.
There you go. Nick's back.
I'm back. I jump off for another meeting. Yeah, it's a little bit more nuanced. They're actually building like an entirely new series of web pages. So the old ones are disappearing, and they're building a completely new one using the current template, which is a lot more nicer and has increased functionality. But with that, where it's instead of like a simple kind of updating of an old website and building a new one, they want to have information from all the work groups before pushing everything. And I've got a handful, including the wetlands groups, was the most recent one that I submitted to them, so they're working on it. But it's, yeah, right. So they're building them, and there's a couple that are really close to being done. But the key is like getting information from the other work groups, and some of them aren't as actively working on it. And that might just be to a point where I just kind of put under construction until they are motivated to work on it. So, but once I do that and something is pushed into production, the old ones I think will be archived or inaccessible at a certain point. And so maybe that's the motivation we need. But the other key part is they have some beta ones out there that I could show what they kind of look like, but it's behind our firewall. So unless you're a water board's employee, I can't like just share a link because it won't work for anybody. But there is I can show you what a general feel looks like if you're ever interested. Yeah. But they are working on it.
Super. And then before we get to sort of Bobby's question, I think the question, Nick, was if we can continue to feed like the charter and the dates, we can continue to send that information to you.
Yeah. For like putting on the current version of the website. Sure. Yeah.
Jan, do you want to? There's a question on the.
Oh yeah. So Bobby's question was, where is the best place and who is the best person to go to learn more about building and monitoring capacity on the North Coast? So it's a really good question, and we're currently working on that. We actually made a lot of amazing contacts at the workshop and connected to some great folks. So right now, our Estuary MPA group is working to help build this capacity alongside SFEI. And so we have reached out to the Water Board Region 1, as well as, who else have we reached out to? Christine, I don't know if you want to weigh in here.
We've talked a little bit to, well, we just began discussion with WIOT. We've, I would just say that we're trying to build capacity within a very broad group of stakeholders. SFEI is going to help us herd the cats. We don't even have our arms wrapped around who those cats are that we have to herd. So thank you, Cindy. I think if folks have, so SFEI is going to help us like identify who are the key partners, you know, particularly tribal partners we really want to engage with. We're likely going to have assistance staffing this monitoring effort with help from watershed the WSPers for Region 1. They're coming online next month. So a lot of things are happening at the same time. But yeah, send us, okay, that's great, Cindy. I think Jennifer might have been, we might have contacted her about Humboldt Adaptation Atlas, but yeah. If folks have ideas of must contact people, please send them to us.
Yep.
And so I guess by us, it's like the Estuary monitoring team and Lydia and Caitlin who are helping to manage this on the SFEI side.
Yeah. And we also are reaching out to some folks at Caltrap too, which are really engaged up there. And so I have an email pending in my drafts that should go out soon. Okay. I'm going to just drop the dates in the chat just so in case you want to copy them over and put them on your calendar now for our future CEMW dates. But otherwise, that's all that we have today. If you have any questions, you're welcome to stay on and Eric, Pike, and I can answer them. But otherwise, thanks so much. Reach out to us if you guys have any suggestions or questions.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you, Eric.
And we will work on consolidating some notes that we can distribute from the meeting as well, right?
Great meeting. Thank you.
Okay. Thanks, everybody. Great to see everybody. Thanks for all the great comments and feedback. I'll make sure I capture all this.
Thanks, Eric. Thanks, Jan. Thanks, Pike and Sri, and thanks our co-conveners. See ya.
See you, everybody. All right, I copied the chat. I think it comes up in Zoom, but just in case, I copied the chat.
Yep, I think I took a bunch of notes so I can send those out and you guys can add to them.
Yeah, yeah, I have 2 pages, but if you want to send those or send me a link to them and I can add my notes to your notes, Jan.
Okay, and then Pike, we can meet. I'll send you an email.
Yeah, let's find a time to check in maybe next week.
Okay.
Let's look at it. We'll figure it out.
Okay. I'm
Cool.
signing off. See you
Thanks,
later.
everybody.
Right. Thanks, y'all.
Right. Take care. Bye.
My computer died, which is why I'm this ghostly shadow that keeps appearing on
Yeah.
the screen.